Hi, everyone. This is Hal Hawkins with the Retro World Series for episode 7. We skipped a week so we could get our next guest on, and sorry about going live earlier and cutting out. We had some connection issues, but I think we've got that resolved. So today we are going to before I get started, I wanted to give you an update on the tournament schedule we're doing for our summer league. So yeah. Next weekend, not this weekend, but the weekend after, on July 11th, we're doing Dr. Mario and for NES, and we are doing Tetris, the Tengen version, so we can have a versus mode on, and they're both going to be on the NES emulator. So NES version, if you're familiar with that, and yeah, so I hope you'll go to RetroWorldSeries.com and sign up for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We should have some good players. And cash prizes and medals will be given out. And we usually give out, people like our medals. So, we'll mail them to you, to the winner and the runner up. And we'll also get you your cash prizes. Only $10 to enter each tournament, which, is pretty cheap. So, I hope you'll join up. Like I said, RetroWorldSeries.com, play Tetris and Dr. Mario on July 11th. All right, so on to our main event, which we are going to be bringing on George Gracin. He has a YouTube channel called G to the Next Level. He's also been a part of the Houston Retro Gamers, so you've probably seen him at some of our conventions. He's a decent Dr. Mario player. I think his wife would claim that he's way better, or that she's way better than him, considering the results in the tournaments they've played with us. But I want to give a warm welcome to George Gracin. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, you cut out. Say that one more time.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Hey, no
I
problem.
appreciate it, man. And for the record, my wife and I trade blows back and forth with Dr. Mario. It's not like
Oh,
Puzzle League where it's a landslide.
okay.
I'm
Because
tired
I've
of
only seen her pictures with the winner. So
it. My heart. Ow. Ow.
is she watching?
Someday
Because
we'll
she
get
might be smiling right now and laughing about that, right? So
probably.
it's unfortunate because we were going to have some good tournaments in Atlanta. It's really unfortunate that you weren't able to go to MomoCon.
Yeah, I wanted to go, but
Well,
with everything happening and
a lot of people
yeah.
wanted to go. About 35,000 people, 40,000 people wanted to go to that.
Yep. Well, next year.
So for those who don't know about you, or some people that have met you but don't know, the full background, tell us a little about yourself. You're a big time Sega guy, obviously with the background. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into being such a Sega guy.
All right. Well, as far as me, I've been gaming all the way back since Atari. But
Right.
I can really tell you that from my time starting with, say, the Atari 2600 and some of the old like computers, and then going into Nintendo, it wasn't really until the Genesis that it really started to build. It's fair to say for me as a video gamer, because it really all stemmed from the fact that when I was growing up, my dad and I used to go to a bowling alley back where they still live today. They still live around that area, and I guess that arcade must have had some sort of contract with Sega or something like that, because they always had all the arcade games. They had Ultra Beast, they had Outrun, they had Afterburner, they had Arabian Nights, they had everything. And so
Where
those are
was
the games
that?
that I grew up with. Wilson Road Bowl.
Okay, because I know that my first kind of big time experience with Sega, besides playing a Sega Master System at a neighbor's house a long time ago,
Yep.
um, was there was an arcade in Dallas. There was like a par three golf course with a giant arcade as well, and it was all Sega as well. I don't know if you,
Nice.
yeah, and I can't remember for the life of me what it was called, but it had like the I always remember the 3D hologram games, and and
Oh, they had Time Traveler.
yeah,
Oh man, I've always wanted to play that.
because I always remember that big white arcade, and I saw it again years later. I was like, I remember that from when I was a little kid, and they had like giant screen Mad Dog McCree and all
Yes.
different games. But it was a huge Sega thing that there was Sega games everywhere. So I didn't know. I was curious if it was something similar like that.
Well, it's close because and once the NES just started to we were still playing on the NES, but then once the Genesis came home and their big thing was all about bringing the arcades home.
Right.
So those were the games that my dad and I played together. And so I was like, I want a Genesis, but they're like, oh, we don't know if we can get that for you yet. But then in 1991, there was the one game that basically pushed it all. And of course, I mean, go figure, it's Sonic the
Right.
Hedgehog. So this was the one that I was like, I have to have a Genesis. So Christmas 1991, my dad got me this, Altered Beast, Outrun, and Arnold Palmer's Tournament Golf for me, right? Arnold Palmer's Tournament Golf, and yeah, ever since then, I've always loved Sega. I mean, even in some of the weaker days of like say the 32X and the US of the release of the Saturn, the
Right.
Dreamcast, and even today, they might not make consoles anymore, but they're still alive and they're still kicking.
So
And
did
so,
you keep upgrading every time something new came out?
oh yeah, well, yes and no, because I upgraded because when I went from Genesis, then we upgraded. My parents got me the 32X for Christmas when it came out, and then sure enough, the year after that, I wanted the Saturn, and they were just like, "Wait, didn't we just buy you a new Sega console?" I was like, "No,
The
mom, that's the
32X is a
32X."
console, right?
And
You
it's like,
know,
but
it's its
it's
own
dead already.
box.
It's like there were no other games coming out for it except for Spider-Man and a few others. So like,
Right.
okay, we're not buying you another Sega console. And I bet a lot of people that's why the Saturn failed. That's probably why, or one reason why it failed. A lot of people had that same mentality, and they got me a PlayStation instead. But by that time, when I was starting to grow up, I had my own job and I was making money, and so I bought a Saturn later on. There's a whole story about what happened in my life with that Saturn on my channel. But I got the Dreamcast after that, and then but if there's one thing that's always been constant with me in video gaming, or two things really, it's Sega and Sonic.
Yeah. So out of all those, I guess is the Genesis your favorite console still?
Totally.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, still my favorite. There's still not a day that can go by like. Cause have you ever had a moment when you have your games, whether they be digital or physical, and you're just like, I have no idea what to play. Like I want to play a game, but I have no idea what to play. What am I really feeling right now? And if I get stuck to a point where I just can't decide when I'm going to play, I just look over at my Genesis wall, and then I'll just like, okay, what should I play out of this? I'm just like, I pick that. Oh, look, I'm playing socket. Awesome. you know,
You just close
sometimes,
your eyes and point.
sometimes, unless it's something really bad like Slaughter Sport, then I might change my mind for something else. But it's just because the games were just more than anything the reason why I fell in love with it so much. Nothing, not to dog the Super Nintendo. I thought Super Nintendo was great, but the Genesis library just resonated with me more personally.
So was it because of a particular type of game you liked? And if
Y-
people are watching, this is your collection right now. So,
yep.
and that's your NES and Super Nintendo, which is a lot smaller than the Genesis one.
Right. I'm
And
not trying to go for like full sets or anything. It's just good quality
are you
titles.
going
And
for full for Saturn? Is that full?
I'm trying. The
Yeah.
key word is trying. Thankfully, I have most of the expensive games, but Saturn games are just so hard to find,
In
man.
good
I mean,
condition with the
eh,
case. The case is the hard
yes,
part.
yes, that's the thing. Saturn and Dreamcast are like the two toughest systems to really try to hunt anything for locally nowadays. I mean, of course, you can find them online if you're willing to pay
Right.
for it, but it's rough, man. But someday, I still have a goal for that in mind.
Do they make aftermarket Saturn cases like they do with?
They do. You can find them online. I know Limited Run Games was supposed to be commissioning some new third party aftermarket cases,
Right.
but I don't remember what happened with that. I'm sure they're probably still working on it, but yeah, thank goodness. And of course, they said that they're easily markable, so you could tell, like for the hardcore collectors, like you can tell which ones are the original and which ones are not.
I'll never understand the long box. I'll never.
Yeah, I mean, I like the PlayStation, like the second
They
version of the
look cool.
PlayStation long box, the plastic ones.
Oh,
Those were cool.
you're talking about the black PlayStation ones, right?
Yes,
Yeah, the
yeah,
kind of
those were cool.
cardboardy type ones, not the you know
The sugar
the
case.
big jeweled case.
Yeah, not those, not sugar glass. It's like no, not those. I think what was one of the other big games then? I'm trying to remember that. I believe Wipeout and a few others have that kind of case. If only they had adopted those. But I mean, jewel cases are the better way to go
Yeah.
if they were just going to do CD.
So you upgraded every year, and did you just start out? I'm going to collect all the different ones, or I'll go back to the question I asked, and then we went off to your collection. Was it the type of games that Genesis? What type of games that Genesis offered that appealed to you? Because I know that like there's a lot more like availability of like shmups on Genesis than there are in the SNES. So was it, or whereas like SNES has more RPGs. Was there a particular genre of game that this is what I like on the Genesis better than all the others, and that's why I'm sticking with Genesis.
I think it was going back to it being bringing the arcade home,
Yeah,
because the style of the arcade games that Sega put out at that time, and just many of the other games that they put out, just had more appeal that I vibe with. Like, I personally prefer Streets of Rage over Final Fight.
I
Like
do
that.
too.
Yes, you could get Final Fight over on Super NES. Still great games,
Right.
but I think I'm sorry. I think Street Fighter was basically. I'd say that with Street Fighter was a little bit different. I think it really also came down to the controller, because that's another thing. I prefer the
Yeah.
controller, the 6 button, excuse me. Like, I prefer the 6 button controller on the Genesis as opposed to the Super NES. So that's a big factor. Of course, Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat. I was so
The first
huge
one.
in getting that Mortal Monday. Yeah, Mortal Kombat 1 and 3, in my opinion, I think are better on Genesis. Mortal Kombat 2 is better on Super
And
NES.
then
Well,
Ultimate,
and then
Ultimate,
you get the 32X one, and it's like, haha, there
yeah.
you go. Now there's a competition.
But I guess the Ultimate. Would you consider the SNES version? Was there an Ultimate for Genesis?
Yeah, there was. It
Okay,
wasn't great.
yeah, it's kind of like Primal Rage on the Genesis versus the 36 version of Primal Rage.
Well, Primal Rage wasn't all that great to begin with.
Oh boy, does
That's
anybody?
just me.
Yeah.
My opinion. It's all good. If you like it, it's all good.
It was so iconic, man. Just watching when I was a kid and watching those dinosaurs, like, whoa, there's these things where these dinosaurs are just chomping
Oh
at each
yeah.
other. It
I mean, it
was,
was revolutionary.
yeah,
It was. I mean, basically, because in the digitized era of gaming, there were just so many unique and quirky games that some of them are just god awful to play now. Like, let's say Pit Fighter, perfect example. I'm gonna be completely honest. I have a soft spot for that terrible game, but
I
I
played
can't
it
think of very
early
other
in the
games like
arcade
that.
too, and I played that too in the arcade. That's one thing I remember playing with a
Did
couple
you ever
guys.
play oh, what was the sequel? Guardians of the Hood.
No,
Did you
I
ever
never
play
played
that?
that. No, I just remember that nostalgia can sometimes play tricks with you, and
Oh yeah.
so I remember I didn't get a SNES until college. I skipped. I had an NES late in its life, and then I switched when the N64 came out. I got it really early on. Skipped over the SNES, so I got one in college, and I got one of the first games I got was Pit Fighter. I was like, I remember playing that. That's
Oh, I'm
awesome.
sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
and then
Pit
I
Fighter
got it,
Super
and I was
NES
like,
is
oh boy,
terrible.
yeah. I haven't played the arcade since. I haven't had a chance to, but I was like, this is not what I remembered. This is terrible.
Yeah. Oh no, it's the funny thing is that I remember playing Pit Fighter in the arcade, but I played the Genesis version. Like, my copy, like my actual cart, is dog-eared by how much I played that game. But then later on, like whenever the arcade experiences started getting home, Midway Arcade Treasures, when it
Right.
showed up on that, and actually finally being able to play the arcade game at home. That's but again, that's really going back to your question. That's one of the biggest reasons why, just the types of games. Like, when I was younger, I preferred more action. I preferred more shooters. Like you said,
Yeah.
shmups. If you like space shooters, the Genesis easily hands it to the Super NES.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's not even a contention. I mean, except for like a handful of games like Axel A and UN Squadron. The Genesis has it like way over.
Yeah.
If you
No
like
one's gonna
sports
find Space
games,
Megaforce or
I have
you
Space
know,
Megaforce.
or I guess there's Gradius 3 and
Space
yeah,
Megaforce is great.
yeah, but
But
it's so
then again, it's like
expensive.
maybe
Who's gonna
we
buy it?
wouldn't have gotten Space Megaforce if it weren't for Musha.
Yeah.
It's like, yep, which great game.
So you're
I
big.
think.
You're a big Shmups guy. What is we had a big Shmups tournament in Vegas.
Oh,
What is?
really?
Yeah, you didn't know that. I kept
No.
trying to get you to go to Vegas, and
I
yeah,
wanted, I wanted to
no,
go,
we
man. Maybe next year.
we had a Shmups tournament where you had three different rounds. In the first round, you played five different Shmups, and I combined with like I combined all the different systems. So we had a Shmup for Master System, Genesis, Saturn. So we had Elemental Master. We
Nice.
had um, well, not Twin Bee, Fantasy Zone 2 for
Okay.
Master System. We had Zero Wing, and yeah, we had some for the more famous ones for Dreamcast and stuff. So yeah, and it
Awesome.
was a lot of fun to watch. So I didn't know if you were a Shmups guy or not based on because you seem to really focus a lot on that. So I was like, man, we got to get you to Vegas. We should have gotten you to
Dang.
Vegas, man.
Next time you do it, let me know. I want in. Well, yeah, I definitely would.
So you've got this huge collection. How did you just keep collecting over time, or was there a point in your life where it's like, all right, I'm gonna start collecting, and my goal is to get all of them?
So, a lot of people ask me, like, when did you start? How
Yeah,
can I really do it with me? And I'll tell you what was really the turning point, because out of most of the systems, like I know we talked earlier offline about how I may have accidentally sold a Master System game and I didn't even know about it. But on Genesis, aside from a few like loose games I may have had in the past, I can't say that I've sold hardly anything in my collection. This has been collecting since '91. But
right,
when I was in college, I worked at FuncoLand. And this was while at that time when I worked at FuncoLand, they were slowly starting to transition out of the 16-bit era and into like PlayStation, Saturn, and into that
right.
territory. So they were clearing out Genesis and Super Nintendo games, complete Genesis and Super Nintendo games, for dirt cheap. I mean, we're talking like $4 or $5 a game complete.
Oh, I remember that
And
they would be selling NES games for like 50 cents a pop, and I'm just like,
yeah,
oh, I wish I
yeah.
had a
And
time
so I
machine.
stocked up. I stocked up when that happened, and then that's where it really came to later on once the collection started building and building and building. And I was like, you know what? And then once internet forums and then YouTube started really becoming a thing, so I was just like, you know what? Actually, I want to try to get all of it. It's like I want to try to collect every game that I can. Now, of course, I only have a US retail collection, just making that
Right,
clear. I don't have a lot of the random variants that are out there, like some of the Sega classics or however. Like I don't have those, and I don't have the heartbeat monitor games. Personally, I don't consider them part of a complete collection because you have to have a specific system for them,
right.
and one of them is like 10 grand plus. So no, I'll
So
back
you
joke.
skipped over the Sega CD when you were growing up,
When I was
right?
growing up, yes. Well, we couldn't really afford it, so
Yeah.
because Sega CD was pricey. My next door neighbor had a Sega CD, so I always went over to his house and we played like Jaguar
So you actually had a
XJ220.
neighbor that had a Genesis, because I rarely knew anybody where I grew up that had a Genesis. It
That
was
kid had everything. He had
oh,
he had a Genesis, and he had a Super NES, and he had a Sega CD. And it's like he had everything. He almost, I remember at one point, like his parents almost bought him a Neo Geo, and
and that's
then
like
I
that
don't
was
know
like
what
six or
happened.
seven hundred dollars
Yeah, plus three
retail.
hundred dollars a cart, or
Yeah.
what, 200 to 300 a cart. Jeez, but yeah, he had everything. So while we couldn't have a Sega CD, I basically got a chance to play over at his house. So that's how
Yeah.
I got exposed to it as a kid. I missed out on, even though I played Super Nintendo at his house, I missed out on so many games growing up. And still to this day, there's still a lot of Super Nintendo games that I've never played.
So what is your goal collecting wise right now?
The funny thing is that if I had to put a goal, I'd say I still want to complete my Saturn collection and I still want to complete my Sega CD collection. Thankfully for Saturn, I believe I've got most of the harder to get in rare titles.
Right.
Now it's just filling in like sports and a few other like random ports of games that are on PlayStation that I'm still missing, and still missing some of the strangest things like Batman Forever, the arcade game. Like, I'm missing some of the strangest ones that, or even ones like Mega Man 8 and Contra Legacy of War, which unfortunately those are all expensive now. But as far as the collection goes, those are really the only two. Everything else is just kind of, hey, if I like the game, I grab it. I'm pretty content with what I've got for the most part for Nintendo and PlayStation and Xbox. I do collect original Xbox too, but I think for the most part, I'm pretty content with what I have on those systems.
So at one
But
point will you start charging a museum fee for people to come in and take a look and play?
I got to get a bigger house first.
See, that's your collection goal right there. Get enough big house, get a big enough house where you can start a museum, and that pays for your mortgage.
And there's a fee plus like an add-on fee for the Sonic collection.
Yeah,
This is an extra $5.
yeah.
Nah, I wouldn't do
So
that.
you went from did you go from collecting, and then you went from you've got this big collection now. So when did you say, okay, I want to start talking about this and showing the world what I know about this?
I'd
It's
say the really
with your YouTube channel.
Oh, yes, yes. I'd say really started about 5 years ago. And of course, when we all, because I've been watching the big people on YouTube for like the longest time. So like the angry video game nerds, the screw attacks, the nostalgia critics, the what cultures, the ones that have been around for a long time, always thinking to myself, I could do it. Like, I know this is something that I would like to do at some point, but I was always kind of spinning my wheels. Like, I could never really tell exactly what and how I wanted to do it that was different. But I know I wanted to add a little bit of Sega flair to it because it was pretty much back in those days, it was all like Nintendo, Nintendo, Nintendo.
Right.
There wasn't really, aside from like a handful of YouTubers like Captain S, which that's a real deep cut if you remember who Captain S is, that were more focused on Sega. So I was like, okay, I want to do that. And at the same time, I was also going to video game conventions and whatnot. But it was Retropalooza Houston 4 years ago that I had actually ran into a buddy of mine. His name is Tyler Esposito. He used to run a YouTube channel by the name of iRetroGamer. And so, we're talking, we're hanging out and whatnot. And then I go to his panel. And then after his panel is all done, we're just, me and his wife and my wife were all talking. And I tell him, like, well, someday I would like to get into this YouTube thing, but I haven't really figured out exactly how to start and whatnot.
Right.
And Tyler's just like, well, you really have a good grip and a good knowledge. And I could tell you have a huge love of Sega. Why don't you go on the channel with me sometime? And so, like, he invited me to join and to be a co-host on his channel for a little while. I started off with one episode with Ghostbusters 2 on the NES because there was a whole big thing. This was right around the time when the Ghostbusters reboot movie was coming out.
Right.
So we were just like, okay, why don't we talk about how Ghostbusters 2 is not that bad? And so I already had a copy of the game. So I came on and I was talking, and literally I am nervous. I am sweating bullets. I'm worried because I'm just like, what are people going to think of me? This is like my first real YouTube video. And he's just like, hey, just relax and just, be yourself and it'll all come naturally. And it did. And then sure enough, he was just like, hey, you know what? This was really awesome. And then the videos started doing really well. And he's like, you know what? Why don't you just come on full time? Just come on full time with me. So I partnered with him for roughly about a year until we both decided that, okay, we went kind of our separate ways a little bit. I finally figured out how I wanted to do it. And then that's when I started realizing, okay, rather than just doing the standard like reviews and countdown lists and all this kind of stuff, how are you really going to be different aside from it just being about Sega? And I was just like, okay, make it a variety kind of show. And that's exactly what I do. It's not just all about game reviews. Of course I do game reviews, but I also do countdown lists. It's called Level 10. Actually, I have two different list videos. I've got a new one that's coming out later on in a little bit year called From Gutter to Throne, where it's a full ranking kind of list.
Of every single game?
Every single game of some sorts, like say...
like genres.
Right. It might be of a different genre. It might be of a franchise. It might be like, say, one that I'm going to be doing is every exclusive Sega Channel game, like ranking it from worst to best. Like sort of like a full review style tier list in a way, if you really think about it. So I've got those. And then one of my favorite things I'd love to do is just like I was talking earlier about the times I spent with my dad when I played. That was something that Tyler and I shared in common. He played a lot of games with his dad, and I played games with my dad. And so, but then between that and my times in collecting and the people that I've met, I have a series called 3 Gaming Items I'm Proud to Own, where I'll pick 3 items in my gaming collection and I'll tell the stories of how I got them.
Right.
And then I'll do other things like I've got something called the Treasure Chest. That's my more traditional review series, where I'll pick like a game in my collection that's either rare or uncommon, not necessarily expensive, but like rare or uncommon. Is it quirky? Is it worth trying out today? That sort of thing. But once I started figuring out my groove, that's was like, okay, I can do this. Now I'm going to throw myself under the bus a little tiny bit. It could be better, and I could put out more, and I'm working on it. But it's really all about getting the train moving, and I can't thank him enough for it. And people like you that are bringing me on to talk more about retro gaming and video games in general. All this has been an awesome 3 years, and to many more.
Well, I'm trying to remember when you and I first met. I think Kingsley introduced us. Probably, maybe at Retropalooza or Classic Game Fest was when we first met. But
I think it was Classic Game Fest.
Were you?
I remember, because you were playing. You had a Streets of Rage 2 Time Attack.
Yeah, speed run. Yeah, and,
Unfortunately, we had to leave early. I wanted to do it, but we had to leave early. It's like, oh man.
Because Kingsley was big into Balloon Fight. That was his game. Yeah, and So he forgot. That was at Retropalooza Houston. He forgot about that. He didn't show up. He forgot about it. And then I had it a second time at Classic Game Fest the next year, and he finally remembered to get into it. But so you're also involved with Houston Retro Gamers. Were you involved with that before or after you started, getting into the convention scene? Or
It was
going?
roughly after, but it
Yeah.
wasn't too long after I started doing. I started working with iRetroGamer. I started working with Tyler. Then, because Kingsley and I, like, we go way back. I've known him for a long time, and then like he was just like, "Hey, do you want to be a part of Houston Retro Gamers? We got this Facebook group. You can reach out and talk to more people in the community. Kind of get yourself out there a little bit
Right.
more." And yeah, sure enough, and it's been pretty great. It's a small knit community, but we're feisty though, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely seen how feisty y'all can get on Facebook and stuff.
Feisty but fun. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just Facebook
Well, yeah, yeah.
groups in general. Am I right?
There's always got to be the one person who's trolling, right?
Of
So,
course, it's the internet.
so Kingsley, he moved to San Antonio, right? And so you
Mhm.
kind of took the reins of Houston Retro Gamers, or at least you seem to be the face of it. I'm the one. I see you more on posting about it or talking about it than anybody else. No offense to anybody else. It's just who I'm friends with and see. So you and I are friends on Facebook. So I see. So what's going on with Houston Retro Gamers? Where do you kind of see it going in the near future? Are y'all doing any more swap meets when things open up again, or what are y'all wanting to do?
We definitely want to do more. We'd like to do more community gatherings in general. I know,
Right.
like right before pandemic hit, we were actually trying to talk to have like another either an indoor swap meet or like an outdoor sort of like done in a car boot style.
Right.
We actually had talked with some either out in Missouri City or somewhere like that because it's really hard to get stuff within Central Houston without having to pay a good amount for it. So we're trying our best to really get the community back together and not just online. But I
Yeah.
understand that right now it's tough.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that once everything is cleared off, then we can all work together and make something happen.
The way
I
I
remember
see
we
it
had
though is
those.
you could have a live thing social distance because those cords are 6 feet long for the
Right,
controllers, so you can stay 6 feet apart and play on the same screen.
right. You
You can stay at
can.
least 12 feet apart because if you put 6 feet opposite directions, as long as it's a big enough TV, y'all can play together.
Right? It's like, well, you can, but it doesn't necessarily mean people will.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can't force people. That's the toughest part of this whole thing.
right.
So that's why I guess like I'm still a as of right now I'm still a guest for Classic Game Fest this year. I mean, I'm
And
still a guest
they moved it
regardless
to
whether it's done
October, right? Yeah.
correct. They moved it to October. So I'm interested to see how that's going to go down. I'm excited because I've wanted to be a part of that convention for years and they finally brought me in and then 2020
Yeah.
you know but I still have high hopes that things will get better and we'll be able to do this. Then Retropalooza Houston will hopefully come back next year.
So what
Yeah,
what can people expect in the near future for G to the next level?
so for me, I know the next couple of projects that I'm working on right now, I actually just posted about it on social media the other day. I'm working on a review on this guy. Oh, Blair. Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis on Game Boy Advance.
Oh, nice.
Because like this all started from basically a conversation that I had online and like in this group that we were all basically bantering back and forth on what's the worst Sonic game. And literally nobody in that group had ever played that version. And I'm like,
I'm sure
okay,
their first answer was 2006.
of course it was.
Yes.
And I'm just like, no, 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 no. And to me, there's more. There's more than just one game that's worse than that. But that's a
Yeah.
subject for another time. But that's the first. That's the first project that it's near completion. It should be up within the next week or so.
Okay.
I'm hoping to get it out by Sunday,
And
but
they just
it
go
should be up
to
within the next
they
week.
just they can just type in G to the next level and you should show up
Yep,
right top on
yep.
YouTube. All right.
Just look it up on YouTube, youtube.com/G to the next level. I'm working on that. I'm working on a new video in my level 10 series where it's going to be 10 games that should have been on the TurboGrafx Mini. So I'm working on that. I'm working on a video about how strange the Sonic movie merch is. And then the next issue in my Treasure Chest review series, it's going to be on Link: The Faces of Evil for the CDI.
I know I brought up the Sonic movie with I think it was Christian in the first episode. What was your thoughts on the movie?
I loved it
Was it
personally.
top three best video games movies of all time?
Oh, it's there's no contention. It's number one.
Number
To
one.
me, it's like it's number one because it does things. It's like yes, it's cheesy, yes, it's cliched at times, but the writing is done so well. Jim Carrey completely nails it. Ben Schwartz completely
Yeah.
nails it. James Marsden completely nails it. The cinematography and the action scenes are done so incredibly well. Original model notwithstanding, Sonic looks amazing in this new game and
Right.
movie. Like in this movie, he actually looks amazing. His personality and his mannerisms, it's just like you want to see a video game or a movie about a video game that captures the feel of the video game without it feeling well, not really cheesy, but you don't have that same sort of like, oh, I'm watching a video game movie vibe with this. You
Right.
don't, and that's why it's so good. You can tell with watching it that's something that hardly any other, except for maybe I don't know, maybe Silent Hill, any other video
Not
game
not
movie.
not Detective Pikachu.
Oh yeah, Detective Pikachu. Excuse
Yeah,
me.
and
Except
I
for
and I
Detective
went to that, and I
Pikachu,
was actually pleasantly surprised because I was
that's my number two.
Ryan Reynolds is hit or miss, and then I was like, wow, this is what was actually one of the best, you know,
Yeah, they
showing the
nailed it.
world. You know, you have movies which I think the first Resident Evil was a pretty good movie, but it really wasn't quite the world that the video games created.
It wasn't.
Whereas like Detective Pikachu actually put the world there perfectly. It
They
was like,
did.
I think Sonic did a good job because I think it would have been really strange to put the world in right off the bat, especially with a lot of
Yes.
people.
Agreed. And I know that's one of the flags that a lot of people had about it. It's just like,
Yeah,
why did they feel like they had to put Sonic in the human world?
yeah.
And it's like because they have to build a story behind it. If they automatically jump them into that world, it's just going to look awkward with everybody else in live action.
Well,
Now we'll see
especially
what happens with
because
the second one.
especially because with Sonic, I don't think as many people are familiar with the world as they are with Pokemon, for example, because
Correct.
so many
I
more
agree.
people. Yeah, and yeah, I am curious what's going to happen and what Jim Carrey's, Dr. Robotnik. I'm not saying Eggman,
Well,
or
he's
Eggers.
Robotnik in the movie, so
Yeah, yeah, which I'm glad they did that.
me too. It
um,
makes sense.
yeah, but I don't know what they're going to do about him, kidnapping the animals and stuff.
We'll see.
That
Well, I
might
mean,
that that could that could be that could get a little controversial, I guess, for some folks, but whatever they decide to do. But I did like
right.
that they set up for a sequel, and I'm glad they changed the model for it. And
Yeah, they did a good job. Like I
I
said, you
wonder if
could
they did that
tell
on purpose.
they
Like
didn't. I
they
can
did.
I can
You
tell
don't
you
think
straight
so?
off the bat they
Okay, all
didn't.
right. It wasn't
A
like, yeah,
lot
we're
of it
gonna do
was
this.
just straight up corporate meddling. That's really all it was. It was corporate meddling because like the team behind it. Because here's something funny, if you notice, and for somebody like me that's been following the evolution of that movie, there's
Right.
one thing that I noticed when looking at the original cast and the original team behind it that were working on the movie before all the controversy happened with the character design and the look and the feel. And if you look at the original trailer compared to the second trailer and compared to how the movie came out, I noticed something. Did you notice how many more members of Sega of Japan are on that credit list than there were before? I
Right.
think they came in and they put their foot down. They probably saw what was happening and they're just like, okay, we don't like this. It's like you either need to change it this way or it's not happening. That's probably what
Right.
happened. And
I,
knowing Paramount, I'm sure that's probably they probably had to be drag kicking and screaming, but money talks. So now that the movie did super well, they're probably like, okay, do it your way.
yeah.
You win.
I think my only real criticism, because I'm a big believer in movies having really good soundtracks, is I thought the soundtrack was pretty disappointing. I think they should have integrated more Sonic music instead of just kind of doing it at the end, and that was it. I think they could. That was my
Yeah,
only
they
criticism there.
silently kind of nudged in Green Hill Zone, but
Yeah,
it's like hopefully maybe they'll put in just a little bit. I'm not saying that not the entire movie or even a good chunk of the movie needs to have music from the game, but if they have just like little subtle nods in there, like the Easter eggs that you do see in it,
yeah.
like if you have like little subtle nods within the soundtrack, hey Junkie XL, just do that.
All
You
right.
know, you know. I think it's. I thought the score was fine, but that's the problem. It was just fine.
So
It was acceptable.
what is your dream Genesis game adaptation to a movie?
Hmm.
Someone brought up one game to me that actually sounds like a cool idea if
And
someone would do
oh,
it.
you know what? No, that would be a better TV series. I was initially going to say Toe Jam and Earl. I would love to
See,
see not a live action.
that is the game that this person I know brought up as they need to make a movie into that.
I don't want to see a movie of Toe Jam and Earl. I want to see a TV series of
Really?
Toe Jam and Earl,
Okay.
like a comedy TV series. I think that would be great. Kind of like again, people want to talk bad about Sonic Boom. I thought the Sonic Boom cartoon was great. The game was terrible, but the game was great. I mean, not the game. Sorry, the game was terrible. The TV show was great.
So not
But something that's like up
Fantasy
in
Star, or not Beyond Oasis, or
I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, another one that immediately comes to mind is, of course, Streets of Rage. You could easily turn that into a
yeah.
movie. But if I
Does
really
it become
wanted to go
another
out
crappy
there,
Double Dragon though?
oh god, I hope not. I hope not. But however, the Double Dragon movie is kind of campy fun in its way, but it's still bad. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. But I'd probably say yeah, either Streets of Rage. We're trying to think of other like big Genesis franchises that could make a movie. However, it's not a Sega franchise, but I would love to see a movie. This is a deep cut. I don't know if you ever heard of this game, El
Yeah.
Canto.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of this one?
Oh yeah.
Okay, awesome. This would be freaking sweet. Imagine like a sorceress in the roaring 20s staring off like giant monsters and evil. That would be amazing.
Oh man.
That would
Yeah.
be incredible. It'll never happen. But that would be
Honestly,
incredible.
I think Eternal Champions could because they all the characters have really interesting stories to them. The game's not
do.
great, but that it could actually.
You know, I don't really see that as being a movie. I could see that as being like an anthology TV series
Yeah.
where it's like
Where they
every
focus on every episode focuses on each character.
exactly, exactly. Because I think them trying the hodgepodge when how many characters were in the original 12, trying to
Yeah.
take 12 characters or even more if you include the Sega CD game and try to put them all together in one movie, I think would be a bit too much. But if they do it in like a miniseries, that
Right.
would be awesome. I'd be down with that.
Golden Axe would be another good one.
I think so.
I know
I think Golden Axe
the
would fit.
sword and sorcery stuff's kind of not really popular anymore, but
Yeah, it's kind of played out now.
But if you did it right, it's not like the horrible Conan remake that they did. But you know,
You think in Fantasy Star would probably work too because it's not. I mean, it has its own fair share of fantasy,
right?
but it's also sci-fi. So, which is one of the reasons why I prefer it over Final Fantasy, because I think that because it has that more like kind of sci-fi look and feel to it. I think it would actually fit a lot better into a film now.
The easiest one to adapt would be Road Rash. It's just Fast and Furious, but with motorcycles.
And then what was the what was the movie that came out right around that time when the Fast and the Furious was big? It was like from the same team. Was it Biker Boys? I think was the name of it. Yeah, that you could say that's a Road Rash.
Yeah.
That's whatever.
Or something, maybe something from the Shinobi series. You know,
Actually, Shinobi would make a good
yeah.
one. I didn't think about Shinobi. That would make a good one. What did you think of the Need for Speed movie? I actually kind of liked it. Did you ever see it?
It was okay.
I kind of liked it. It's like
Like-
it's okay.
Not really my type. Oh, Echo the Dolphin, man, as an animated movie. No.
Well, maybe if they did that in the '90s when eco-friendliness and whatnot was a huge rage and everything, or like Fern Gully, that then that
It'd be a Free Willy ripoff.
sort of.
Yeah.
At that point, then what? You might as well just make Awesome Possum into a movie.
That wouldn't be such a Rocket Knight, man.
I see that as more of a TV series than a movie.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you're probably right about that. So I know I ask everybody this: what is the game that you consider like this is the game that I'm best at? I can kick anybody's butt at this.
Oh, for me?
Yes. Like
If
this
we were
was
doing
my
like
game
a-
growing up. I'm going to kick your butt at this.
The funny thing is that when you're talking about games growing up, didn't really play I could
Yeah.
kick anybody's butt at. I'm decent at fighting games, but I'm not like excellent at fighting
Right.
games. I could probably say if anything. The funny thing is, and you're gonna laugh. The entire world is gonna laugh. I've already told this story before, but Dance Dance Revolution, because
Really?
that was, and it still would be my game if old knees haven't gotten to me. But DDR,
That's what the handrail is for, man.
I don't handrail. Don't do it. Nope. I have a personal thing about handrailing. You want to do it, great, but for me, it actually restricts you while you play.
Yeah.
To me, though. But yeah, because when I was in college, I was actually because they used to have a ranking system Like you would basically do it within like the tournaments that are set up at
Right.
arcades, and they would tally your score and how many perfects and greats that you got, and then they would put it all up online, and they would list it up against everybody that's in the same group within the whole state.
Right.
I was actually a top 10 ranked DDR player
Oh wow.
for like almost a year, and then I got knocked down, and then I just stopped competing like after a while, but I still played. I played that game for
So,
what, maybe about 10, 12 years.
so
I
you
played it for a
must you
long
must have been
time.
laughing your butt off in that Grandma's Boy scene when that came out.
That was great.
Yeah.
That
Right.
was great.
Yeah.
It's like,
They made that after me. They made that scene after me.
and the best part about it is that the dude was playing Dead End. That was the best part about it. It's like, 'cause that's a hard song, and it's like, oh, new high score. Oh, did I break it? It's so good.
Is that good? So since we're talking about like best games or games you get, you recently you came out with a tier list because you like to do tier lists on the Mini,
Hmm.
and we'll get to another tier list after this. But how long did it take you to come up with this tier list? Because I don't necessarily agree with a lot of it, but how long did it take you? Was it a collaborative effort where you talked to people, or was it like, nope, this is a solo thing? This is exactly what I think is the best list that came out for the Mini.
Oh no, it was a solo thing for
Yeah.
real. But the thing is that it was something that I didn't just like come up. I didn't BS it. I didn't come
Yeah.
up with it on the fly. I was just like, I have to really kind of sit down because I was at my computer and I was just looking at the tier maker and just kind of going through like, oh, is this right? Is this right? And then especially like, oh, I caught so much controversy on it. But my opinion is that if you're gonna do rankings, if you're gonna do tier lists, if you're not causing controversy, you're not doing it right,
Right.
because it's like somewhere, because someone's going to disagree with you in some way. If everybody agrees with you, then something's up. So
So
like in
did
the,
you
the
did
big
you
things with,
have a I guess do you score them in different ways? Like some reviewers will go, okay, I gave this a 4 out of 5 on graphics, 3 out of 5 on sound.
nah,
You
I
don't
didn't
do
go
you're
that
not
deep.
you don't get that technical with it.
I don't get that technical with it. It's just
Right.
all about, just to me, playability and just what the game means to me. It's like, or what it really, because I don't want to shroud rankings and something like that for
Right.
importance of, like, say, the game and the franchise. It's like, say if I wanted to put Altered Beast in the top tier because it was one of the first Genesis games out there. No, that's not right. But I don't want to get too technical into something like that. That's why I'll
Right.
basically, when I did that tier list, I had kind of the skeleton behind it, but everything that I talked about was just off the cuff. It was not scripted. Like,
Right.
everything is just completely off the cuff on it. And even then, like, while I was recording it, I made a few changes on the fly. So I was just like, you kind of like Street Fighter 2, perfect example. Like, I originally had that in the A tier, and then as I was talking about it, like right when was getting ready to move on to the next game, I was like, you know what? Nah, move it to the S tier. It's got to be there, because it was an excellent port. Voices withstanding. It was a fantastic port of one of the best fighting games ever. So how can I not put this anything less than S? So, but yeah, that's really where it all comes down to. And tier making those tier lists is, I mean, it's not something that's technically, like, it doesn't take a whole lot to edit something like
Right.
that. But man, do I have fun making. It's kind of like my three gaming items I'm proud to own series. It's
Well, I'm
like, I
glad.
love making
I'm,
it.
I'm glad you said you have fun making it because we're about to make our own tier list right now live. Um, so the Retro World Series is all about competition and mainly versus games because that's real competition right there when you're head to head on the same screen, battling it out, affecting each other's outcomes. So one of the things is that what I've discovered, and I've been doing this for 4 years now, is that Genesis games seem to really fall below the other systems when it comes to competitive versus games. They have some good ones, but they don't seem to hold that interest level still that like NES games and SNES games and 64 games do. What do you think is the reason behind that? Before we get into this tier list, what do you think? Do you think it's because fewer people played Genesis, or it was an older crowd that played it at the time, and they're now older? What do you think is the reason why Genesis is a little less popular on the competitive scene?
I think it's a combination of both, really.
Right.
I think it really does come down to, because the Sega, just as a whole, like Sega as a whole, was more geared towards an older audience.
Right.
But you could tell, like, the majority of the games that came out for the Genesis, a lot of it was more. I mean, this is debatable, but like a lot of it is more single player focused
Right.
than multiplayer. And then even when up against, say, the original NES, which was all about multiplayer,
Yeah.
and the Super NES. And once you get into that level of people that want to play, I think maybe nostalgia actually kind of falls into that as well, to where people have more of memories of playing it on their own versus playing in versus. Now, I know one genre that I could definitely debate that on is sports games,
Yeah.
because to me it's like Genesis games and sports. It's like the Super Nintendo was barely a comparison
Oh,
compared to
hands
that.
down. Yeah.
But as far as other types of games, it's either like a neck and neck, or I'd say NES and Super NES has it. But I think that's really where it comes down to. I think it comes down to just the general target audience
Right.
and just really going with what you know.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a tier list, and what I want you to base it on is two factors. We're not going to get super technical. Is one is popularity, is
Okay.
a game that people are familiar with and know and can pick up and play and compete in. The other part is playability. Is it a good game or not? Because there's very popular games that aren't great, but then there's some really good competitive games that weren't necessarily very mainstream. And so
Okay.
I came up with a list. I'm not including some of the games, like I could throw in some of the more sports type games like FIFA or Madden, but those aren't always the most practical or popular. People don't talk about I still play Madden 95 or something like that. And
Yeah.
I don't hear anybody say anything about that. Or the
Most
lot of
people
those
don't.
sports, if they're not an arcadey type sport game, people have moved on to the next version of it.
Yep.
So
There's a
the
reason why stuff like Tecmo Super Bowl is still hot today. It's
Right.
because of that.
It's kind of that good balance where it's got that form of realism, but it's a little bit more. It's a lot more simple and more arcade. Yeah, it still has that arcadey feel to it. So I came up with a list of 15, and we'll name them off, and then we'll go in alphabetical order, and we'll rank them by tier. So columns, Dash and Desperados, Dr. Robotnik's. You got a terrible poker face, by the way. So,
No,
and
I'm
I already
just like
saw
thinking myself
your
already. I'm like,
yeah. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, Eternal Champions, General Chaos, Greatest Heavyweights, Herzog's Vi, Marble Madness, Mutant League Football, Mutant League Hockey, NHL 94, Road Rash 2, Sonic 3, Super Baseball 2020, and I'll explain why I included that one later, and then WWF Royal Rumble.
Okay.
So we're going to start out. I'm going to go ahead and put the tier list here. So we have Chaos Emerald tier. We're not doing this, super tier, God tier, whatever. It's Chaos Emerald tier, Invincibility tier, Coin tier, Ring tier, and then Turd tier. So
Dookie.
or Dookie tier, like you like to put it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to rip you off completely. So,
I didn't
so,
trademark it.
so we've got we have got columns first. If we're going to be where do you think columns should fall as a two-player versus game?
Okay. Columns, as I know when I did my ranking on columns in my tier list, it pretty much had the same sort of sentimentality on it.
Right.
Now, as far as importance-wise goes, columns is pretty important to the Genesis library because it was Sega's answer to Tetris.
Right.
Like at that point in time, there wasn't really anything that could compete to it because Puyo Pop / Dr. Robotnik didn't come out until later.
Right.
So Columns was really, I think, in like Junction and a couple of other random puzzle games. So it's hugely important. But as far as a game goes, I mean, me personally, and this is also another one I caught some heat from. Apparently, Columns is very popular in Europe and not as popular in the U.S. I got some heat from over there for.
Yeah, I didn't know people many. I didn't know anybody that played columns here.
I tried it when I was a kid. Like my sister loved Columns. I was never big into it. I was more into Tetris. So
Right.
I was just like,
Right.
yeah, and Dr. Mario, of course. But Columns, if I had to put it in anything just from a playability standpoint, because two-player mode, like it's fine, it's functional, it works, but I don't really get hype playing it.
So
And I guess
you think it's coin or ring tier?
I'm gonna say Ringed here because
Right.
it's still a good game. Like at the end of the day, it's still a good game, but it doesn't hype me like many of the other kind of versus competitive puzzle games
Right.
of that time.
All
It's
right.
definitely no
So
Dr. Mario.
no. All right.
That would be
So
in the top tier.
yeah, that's definitely up there in the competitive tier. And so the next game, let's see here, is going to be, and I think this is a good one, is Dash and Desperados. And you can see the gameplay. Now, most people probably I don't think a lot of people have heard of this game, but it's got it's I think it looks great. It's a quirky, cool looking game, but it has a really fun two-player part to it when when you're racing each other. And I think the Genesis doesn't have a lot of racing games, or at least very good ones, and they seem to add this side-scrolling racing. They do it with Sonic games, and then they did it with Dash and Desperados. What do you think of this as a competitive game? It definitely doesn't fit in the popularity category, but as far
No.
as playability, what do you think of it as an actual tournament?
I think for a tournament wise, it would be something that's quirky enough that it would garner interest to where people would be like, "Oh, what is that?" Then when you explain the concept to it, it's just like, okay, it's you versus somebody else, and you have to get from point A to point B, and you can attack each other
Yeah,
on the way over. Because that's the difference between, say, something like that and Sonic 2, where it's just race,
yeah,
or
you're
Sonic 3,
you're in
it's like where it's
separate.
just racing.
Yeah, you can't attack each other really, and yeah, you can actually stomp on each other and stuff and dash.
It
You know,
reminded me when I was playing it because it reminded me a lot of there's a TurboGrafx game. It's on the TurboGrafx Mini called JJ and Jeff or Kato Khan and Kato Khan and Kato Chan and Ken Chan. Excuse me,
right?
can't pronounce. It plays to me. Those two games play very similar to each other, and I know that there's a pseudo sequel of Dash and Desperado on the Neo Geo. I think that the game was just it's a lot of fun. Like once you
Yeah,
really start getting into it, it moves fast, it plays well, and yeah, it's a deep cut. A lot of people don't talk about that one very well. If I had to rank it anywhere because yeah, it gets some points knocked off because yeah, it was kind of a lost gem, so to
yeah.
speak. I don't it's definitely not hidden. But I'd say like it's a lost gem, so to speak. I'd
What was
probably
the
put it
game
in
that I'm interrupting? There was another game where you had two brothers that it looks exactly the same, and they had magical powers. What
oh, what if they had magical powers?
man, what is that
I
game
wonder if you're
called?
thinking about Bonanza Brothers.
Yes.
Are you thinking about that? Okay, yeah, the bank
Maybe
robbers.
it's Bonanza Brothers. No, no, no,
Okay.
no, no. There's an
Are you thinking about the oh, not Cheeky Cheeky Boys.
yes,
Oh, Cheeky Cheeky? Oh, okay.
yes, that is it. Cheeky Boys. That it seems to. I don't know if the same designer. I'd have to look it up, but it seems like the same designer did
Maybe.
Dash and maybe,
Actually, I'm not sure on that. Maybe.
but
But yeah,
s-
this game is a lot of fun. I
yeah.
liked it.
So invincibility tier maybe ring tier. What do you think it should go?
Uh, I don't want to knock it too hard for it not being super important because the game is
Right.
too fun for that. I'm not. I put it in the invincibility tier.
Okay.
I think that's a good solid tier for it because
Right.
while I think that as a multiplayer game it's great, but yeah, it just doesn't have a whole lot of oomph
Right.
yet. It's something that I would love to see more people talk about because it's a lot of fun. Hell, I might even talk about it. I haven't heard anybody talk about Dash and Desperados.
I've
I mean,
seen one
hardly
review. I
anybody
think
does.
Classic Game Room did a review of it, and that's pretty
Oh,
much the only review I've seen
it's
of
a good
it.
game.
Yeah. All right. So next one on the list is Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Now, this was, you know, somewhat popular, I guess. Pretty. I know it was included in some of the collections,
Hmm.
and we've tried to do tournaments for it, but really haven't had a whole lot of turnout for it. Maybe because it's just not, on the same level as Tetris Attack and Tetris and all that, or Pokemon Puzzle League. But where do you think this falls?
Well, it's definitely not in that same league. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
But if I could offer a little bit of a challenge to you, instead of doing Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, do a Puyo Pop tournament. Because a
really.
lot of people, because Puyo Pop is a big name now, and the funny
Yeah,
thing is that it's still going with Sega today. And because since they reskinned it as Dr. Robotnik Mean Bean Machine and on the
right,
Super NES Kirby's Avalanche, the
right.
a lot of people still don't know that it's Puyo Pop. But when you say the words Puyo Pop, people might actually start coming more.
So it's
I love
not.
this game
It's a
personally.
branding issue.
It is. I think
Okay,
it's a branding
so
issue more than
so
anything.
do it again. Just rename it,
Yeah,
and
I
then
would
they'll show
say
up and like,
so.
"What is this? This is it."
Right?
Yeah, what is
but,
this? This is
but I think you might actually get more of the younger crowd with
right,
that because yeah, with Puyo Pop or Puyo Tetris, excuse me. And you
right.
say it's like, oh well, Puyo Retro. It's like, wait, Puyo was from back in the 16-bit days. You might spark that
Yeah.
interest
And nobody talks
with
about
that.
Kirby's Avalanche either. So
No, no, nobody talks about that game. Nintendo just kind of put it out and then like, okay, here you go, it's done. But yeah, it's Puyo Pop. I mean, Sega got behind Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean
right.
Machine though, so Personally, like it's pretty important because I mean it's still related to Sonic in some way, shape, or form. Like even though it's just a reskin of a different game, but it's still a legendary franchise. It's
It's the
nowhere
exact
on near
game.
on
It's
the
just
level.
reskinned. So
Exactly. I mean, it's
yeah.
nowhere near on the level of say a Puzzle League or Tetris or anything like that. But I'd say as far as like the high tier royalty of puzzles go, Puyo Pop is pretty high. Importance level, yes, definitely. From a multiplayer level, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It,
So you
it,
would
it
put
is
it in
absolutely
in
fantastic.
Chaos Emerald tier.
I would put it in the Chaos Emerald tier.
All right.
To me, I think it's worthy of it, mainly because it was one of the first. Because Columns doesn't really do it as well. Doctor
Right.
Robotnik on the Genesis was one of the first ones to introduce an attack system with puzzle games. But it's not only just an attack system; it's an attack system that you can counter. So, like, say if somebody's about to dump a whole bunch of trash on you, you can counter that by making your own combos and whatnot. That's something that a lot of other puzzle games, Puzzle League, doesn't really do. So, yeah.
Is someone about to throw some stuff at you? I'm just okay. All right. I just didn't know if anybody was in the same room that might be throwing something at
No,
you. If you're
no, no. We talk about that because I know one of the main reasons why it's like. Don't get me wrong, I love Puzzle League. It's an awesome game. To me, it's an
right.
excellent game. It's definitely a top tier game. I am absolute trash at it because I can't get over the fact that you can't counter.
Yeah.
That's really the thing is that you could just take on like yes you're throwing stuff at your opponent, but if your opponent is better than you are and they're quicker at knocking everything out, meanwhile you're just piling on top and it just all of a sudden dumps on you, and what are you going to do? You're done.
Right.
Meanwhile with Dr. Robotnik you could have a good back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Well, on the branding thing, yeah, I was on Wikipedia it said that it was the Mega Drive version was the best seller in Japan for 4 months. So
Nice.
so that's pretty impressive. So maybe I should just rebrand it and yeah, and just call it a Puyo Puyo tournament and see how
Yeah,
many
try
people
it.
show up.
Try it.
Um,
I mean
all
if you
right,
wanted to get Puyo Puyo for Mega Drive, it's cheap.
yeah, I mean,
It's super cheap.
of course, it's not going to fit in all my Genesis
Oh yeah, you're
consoles.
right.
Yeah,
Put a
it's
game
not
genie
like
on it.
it's not like the Super Nintendo where I can just pop those little pins
Right.
to
I'll
fit the
put a game genie
Famicom
on it
games.
unless it has a region lock.
Yeah, but then I
I
gotta
have the
go.
game. I could always try it and let you know.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know if it has a region lock because there's a few games like that I've tried and I was like, oh, that one just happens to be region locked. All right, so here's our current list. Mean Bean Machine, top, definitely. Dash and Desperado, Invincibility, Column. So the next one we're going to go over, and I already have an idea what your answer is going to be based on your Genesis Mini tier list. But Internal Champions, is it still trash for a
It's still
competitive?
trash.
Was it
It's
popular enough, and
oh, it
did
was
enough people
super
play it?
popular back in the
Yeah,
day. I mean, it was a hot game back in the day,
right,
and it was something that even and I mentioned this in the video that I was just like, as a kid, I loved the game. I love the characters, I love the graphics, and to me, I still think it's one of the most beautiful games on the system. It has a huge amount of importance. It's just the
right.
game just doesn't play well,
Yeah. So
like at all.
playability is one of the most important really a huge factor to a
Yep,
competitive game. And
yep.
so
Now they fixed
if
that.
it's not playable, now,
Yeah,
people may what now if it was the Sega CD version, would that change your opinion at all?
it would bump it up at least one tier for me
But
because
you
the
still
Sega
think
CD
it's
version,
it's Dookie tier
the Sega CD one.
or
No,
the
oh
regular
yeah,
version? Yeah.
still, my opinion has not changed. It's still not great. It's a beautiful game, great
Right.
storyline, cool characters. That's about it.
All right. Next is going to be General Chaos.
Ooh, this
Now,
is a tough one.
yeah, this is a tough one because I don't know. I didn't. Again, I wasn't. I was too busy playing outside to do a whole lot of video games. But I didn't know anybody that really had Sega Genesis. Everyone had Nintendo or Super Nintendo where I was,
Hmm.
and so I'm not as familiar with like, oh, everyone was playing this Genesis game and this Genesis game. Was General Chaos popular back then? And I think most people agree it's a pretty good game, but is it popular enough to bring it into a high tier of competition?
I would probably say no. I think it'd be a fun game to kind of like have as say a break in between if you got like a long running tournament or something like that,
Right.
and you just want to have something for people to kind of kick back and relax and play against each other, then yeah, it's fun because
Right.
General Chaos to me is a great game. Was it popular back in the day? No, not really. It's one of those games that basically got a cult phenomenon.
Right.
Like as it aged, more people started noticing it more and more. And now when people talk about, oh, General Chaos is a great game, and it is. But back in the day when we were kids, like I didn't even have General Chaos as a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, next door neighbor had it, so I always played it over at his
It
house.
looks great. It's a
It's
very good
it's
looking game.
fun.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that I love most about General Chaos is how it just doesn't take itself seriously. This
Yeah.
the tongue-in-cheek humor and the character designs and whatnot are so great. I mean, it's Brian Collin, the same guy who did Rampage. You know, I love the fact that how it's kind of like what was the name of that one on the 3D Return Fire? I was trying to think of the name of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how that game didn't really take itself seriously too, but it's a real-time strategy versus kind of game that's simple enough that anybody can really get into. It's not like a Command and Conquer or something like that. So
Right.
I think it's a blast to play, but as far as like from a tournament level standpoint, that's a little iffy.
Do you think it would also? I also think one of the other things I think about is how long it would take for a tournament to go.
Some
Like how
battles can
long?
take a while.
Yeah. Would it
Uh,
take too long for it to be practical for a tournament?
It might be.
Yeah.
It might be. And I just wonder about like, yeah, you're talking about just from a turnout standpoint. Wonder for that too. Yeah, I don't know if I would really rank it in say something that's good for tournament play. It's something
Right.
it's a great game to play just like, with your mates next door and just, having a ball, shooting each other in general chaos.
It's also not quite as accessible as a lot of games because it's gotten a little expensive too.
I haven't really followed the
I
price
don't.
on
I
that
don't.
one.
I don't see it
So
out there in the wild ever, and it's
no,
usually,
I will
you
say
know.
that it's uncommon at least. I don't know if it's pricey, but it's uncommon at least.
So for people, if they wanted to start playing it competitively, it would the entry level to get into it, the entry would be a little bit more expensive to get into it and
It would
start
be.
playing. Yeah.
It
So
would be.
probably
So that
probably
kind of
ring
puts it.
tier.
I'd say ring tier.
Yeah.
For something like
That
that, yeah. The game
yeah.
is too fun to put it in Dookie tier. Like if
No, no,
anything,
no.
but
It's a
as
good
far
game,
as yeah,
and it's
it's a
fun
lot of
two
fun.
player. I is just would it really work out. So the next one I think is a tough one because I've played it against some friends of mine and we had a blast. But I don't know how many people actually played it. It's easily accessible. It's not expensive. So it's I can find you can find it at pretty much any game store. Is Greatest Heavyweights,
Hmm. Okay.
and it is fun. Your fingers will hurt after it,
Yeah.
but it is a fun boxing game. We now it may sometimes those games can go a little while if you're going the full 15 rounds, but as far as a two-player game, it definitely it's not just a button masher. You definitely have to try and be strategic because each boxer has different skills, and and so you want to try different punches and different blocking and all that. Where do you think this lies?
So with this one, I'd probably say it lies pretty high.
Yeah,
I don't know if I would put it in like the highest tier, but I would
The
say
Chaos
that
Emerald.
it's well. Let's think about it for a second because as far as just playability, it is in my opinion like because I've played most of the boxing games
Right,
on the Genesis and Greatest Heavyweights and Evander Holyfield, the prequel that came out before this. I think that both of those games are just so easy to pick up and play, but have a
right,
tremendous amount of depth to it. And as you said, you're absolutely right. People that are really skilled at the game can go on for a while. So that might be a detriment when you're talking about doing it in a tournament. But if you're
right,
talking about just like having just fun like at these tournaments and having people that would actually turn out for something like that, I think people would turn out for Greatest Heavyweights. But I think one of the things that I really love most about it is the level of detail it
right.
got for basically every single boxer for all their mannerisms and whatnot. Especially like
Oh,
I always
it looks
remember because
fantastic.
yeah, because like when I was a kid, I always picked Muhammad Ali. And I always would like taunt him because he's like, "What's my name?" And, like
Yeah,
it's so great how Sega really got that, and then the pseudo kind of 3D around the boxing the ring, basically how
right.
they got that effect to work. Is everything about it is it's a great game, and I feel it's also one that from a multiplayer standpoint, I think people are kind of sleeping on today.
Yeah. I know
Hmm.
I showed you part of the list, but I know
Hmm.
this one was kind of one of the curveballs because I know you hadn't seen this one, so this was probably coming out
Hmm.
of left field a little bit.
honestly, hmm, I'm honestly kind of tempted to put it in the Chaos Emerald tier, just because it is a lot of fun. It's like, yeah, it's a boxing game, but like I said,
Right.
it's a boxing game that has just a tremendous amount of playability
Well,
and
the other
replayability.
thing. It's just one of the few good multiplayer boxing games.
Yes, that's
Think
something
of
that I've
that. I
noticed
mean,
that boxing games have a
there's
hard
not
time.
really any. I mean, everyone's like Punch Out and then kind of, but
Uh, Ready to Rumble. The funny thing about Ready to Rumble is that I don't really see it as much of a boxing game as more of a fighting game.
yeah. I
In
mean,
I don't know, maybe I'm tripping and feeling like that, but I feel it's more of a fighting game than a boxing game, if anything. Like between James Buster Douglas boxing, and that game's super important, but it was a trash game.
yeah.
What like boxing heavyweight legends of the ring, George Foreman. Really, this was the one that got it right.
Right.
And Evander Holyfield to an extent, but this game was just Evander Holyfield, but just much more expanded, much better. Yeah, you know what? I want to put it in the Chaos tier.
Oh, you do.
The more I think about it, I want to put it in the Chaos tier because I think just from
Okay.
a multiplayer standpoint, important standpoint, it's a great game.
All right. So we're putting it in the Chaos Emerald tier, and I wasn't expecting that, but I definitely respect
See,
that and agree
that's what
with
I'm
it. I think
talking
it's
about.
fun.
That's what
I
happened
think
with
it's
me when I
fun.
did my video. It's just that the more I think about it, it's like, you know what? No, bump it up a tier
Go.
because
It's a
or
gut
move it
call,
down a
but
tier.
man, uh, it's one of those things where you've got to, you can't be you can't think about it too much. It's like you got to think about it on the fly. I want to play that right now, and this is one of the
Yeah,
games that I picked up.
I
I'd never
kind of
played
do
it
want to play it
before.
right now. I
Yeah,
might
a
actually
couple.
fire it up after we're
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
I
I need to
might.
drive down to Houston. You and me just wear our thumbs out playing greatest heavyweights. But
Dude, you're
yeah,
welcome
I
to come
got it a
over
few years
anytime.
ago and played it with a friend, and we just had a blast playing it.
Yeah, man.
So
Yeah, man. Welcome to come over anytime. Totally.
now the next one is probably less well known, but it's got one of those cult followings, I think, where people who know it's a good game. I don't know how practical it is for a tournament because the carts are a little pricey. Plus, I think it would take a while to do this tournament. But the next game is Herzog Zwei. Or
Ooh,
Zvi. What is it? Zwei or Zvi?
that's why.
Zwei. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is another tricky one
Mm-hmm.
because, well, I think it's a great game too. I think the barrier for entry for something like this for a sort of a pick up and play tournament, I think
Right.
is a little high for something like that. I remember because, well, I guess it also really all depends on your level of knowledge of real time strategy games or
Right.
stuff like that. Because I know as a kid when I played Herzog's Way, I had no idea how to play it, and I didn't have the manual either.
Oh well,
So when I
that's
rented it, I
tough right
had to
there.
kind of learn it on the fly, and I was just like, oh, this is weird. But even as a kid, like I wasn't really, oh, this game was made by this company, and like I wasn't quite there yet. But I could tell just by listening to the music and by the way the game looks and feels that it's a
Right.
techno soft game. I knew it was from the same guys that did Thunder Force because like I love Thunder Force so much. I still love Thunder Force today. And I was like, Herzog's Why is it's a strange one. But for a tournament style
I told
multiplayer,
you I was going to challenge you. I don't.
yeah, I kind of put it in the same level as General Chaos, to be honest with you. But I think
Really.
General Chaos is a bit more is well, not a bit. It's a lot more. It's a lot more accessible. And
Yeah.
I can tell you too, in Herzog's Why, the battles can last a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Especially if
that's
you know
another
what you're
factor.
doing.
Yeah, importance. This game, I don't know the exact sales numbers, but considering how uncommon it is and how this is another one that gained well, not phenomenal, but it gained like kind of cult status later on.
All right.
Uh, I'd probably say like it probably didn't do well back in the day. I don't even
No.
remember Sega promoting it,
Yeah.
but yeah, I probably put it in the same level as General Chaos.
So ring tier.
Yeah, I'd say ring tier. It's a good game, but again, not super important and not one to really factor in for multiplayer.
Right. All right. So we will switch to our next game. And this is a more well known game because it was a cross platform game, but I think the Genesis version is probably the best port of it because it was an arcade game, and that's Marble Madness.
Ooh. Okay, I have
Now,
a
I know
question
there's
for
two
you.
different versions.
Okay, that was going to be my
Now,
question.
now, if we're talking about accessibility, was it the Tengen version is what, like super rare and yeah, I know it's better, but it's just completely inaccessible from
Well, it's better. but I don't think it's that much better to really
To
kind of
justify
shut
to
to
justify it, yeah.
yeah, to shove the EA version like off to the
Right.
side, because to me the EA version still plays okay. I think
Right.
the physics are just a little tiny bit wonkier. Of course, like the Japanese version, you could use the mouse, so that
Right.
was really like the best thing about it. But I think the game is still excellent,
Right.
and for something like a multiplayer game, as long as you don't play with the sound on, you're fine. Just keep it on mute.
You don't like the
And I think
music?
it's for oh, dude, the EA version is awful. No, the music in it is awful. But the Tengen
Oh
version is
man,
fine.
can we just set up
But
all 60 of my 65 of my TVs playing like simultaneously
oh
Marble Madness?
no, you play stage two and watch your ears bleed.
Yeah.
No, but to me though, it's like, look, that's not even really a factor for what we're really talking about. I mean, Marble
Right.
Madness, it's a classic. I mean, it's an arcade classic. It's great in multiplayer. I mean, it's a lot of fun in multiplayer. I think it's something that like you could really get a good crowd
Right.
building. Like if you have two people that are really good at the game and are really trying to tear at each other, you could probably get a really good crowd out of it. It wouldn't take too long to set up, and it's a fantastic game.
Especially because most people who have played it have only played it solo. It adds a
Yeah.
whole different dynamic when you've got someone, because you're used to, okay, I go this way. You know the path, you know the speed, and all of a sudden someone bumps you,
Yep.
and your that muscle memory is all of a sudden thrown off because
Yep. And you're
you know
only as good as the person you're playing with. That's the
right,
thing. It's not like Toe Jam and Earl where like the screen will split or anything like that.
right,
No, you're at the mercy of how good the other player is.
yeah,
But at the same time, though, it's not enough to really. It's not like something like Rayman Origins or like New Super Mario Brothers World where you could just outrun and outpace the other player and anger them and make them mad.
right.
In this game, you pretty much have to deal with it. But it's just so much fun. And yeah,
Does it
it's the
have
inferior
enough?
version, but
I'm sorry.
it's like yeah, it's the inferior version.
Yeah,
But I think from a
but not
service standpoint,
much.
it's excellent, not by much.
But it's way better than like the NES version, for example.
Oh
So,
yeah, definitely better than NES version.
but is it well known enough that there's still people out there that are playing it and would think I'm going to win this tournament?
I think
I
there's
want to
an
show up and play it.
unspoken crowd of Marble Madness. It's one of those ones where you're just like you don't really see them talking on social media or
Yeah,
in like a crowds or anything like that. But if you post up, it's just like I tell you one thing: if there was a Marble Madness tournament, I'd be there. I would totally be there. My wife would be there too. We would be.
right.
It's a great game, and I guarantee there'll probably be more people like me that will come out of the woodwork. Like, ooh, a Marble Madness tournament? Like, yeah, Emerald tier,
Uh, yeah. So
definitely.
Emerald, you really Emerald tier, really?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I
I'd
will
say so
move it.
because you pretty much put the nail on the head. I think that even for the people that had never played it in multiplayer, that might go to a tournament or whatnot and then try it in
Right.
multiplayer, and they'll realize how much it changes the game. It's basically like kind of eye opening in that sense. So
Right.
yeah, totally.
The next one, the next two actually, the same companies that made them, same name, so to speak. If you're watching, you may know exactly what we're about to talk about. Very fun games, but a little pricey, and also probably not. They're probably pricey because no one lets them go because they're so good. I think not necessarily because they were not really made, but so we're going to
I think
start
that's kind
out
of
with
Sega as a whole, really.
yeah,
We're
true,
mighty. We
but
don't let our stuff go.
well, I mean, you look even at SNES games, like you look at something Sunset Riders, which is definitely I mean, you can debate me if you want, but it's the best of the ports, the
Yes. No,
SNES
I'm not
version.
debating with you on
And
that.
it wasn't
The Universal
uncommon.
Solitaire
It's
is
just
better.
I don't think anybody lets it go, which is why it's so expensive. Because I think they
Yep.
made 750,000 copies of it. So
I have the Super
um,
NES Sunset Riders for that reason because
yeah,
it's better. I mean, I have the Genesis one too, but I mean, it's way better.
right.
But
So
yeah,
in that vein, the next game is Mutant League Football,
yeah,
and they've basically done a sequel to it, Mutant Football League,
right.
and I I had the pleasure of meeting Tim Kitzrow, and
Lucky
he's working. I think he's working with the new version of it.
he is.
But yeah, what do you think of Mutant League Football, the Genesis?
I played Mutant League Football, not Mutant Football League, because I have it too. But Mutant League
Right,
Football, I had played it recently, and I just realized that yeah, it still holds up very well today. I mean, even for somebody like me who doesn't really play Madden or anything
right,
like that, I think it did a great job of kind of straddling the line to where if you did play the realistic EA kind of football games, you would still you wouldn't be out of your element by picking up
Right.
Mutant League Football. So I think that's where it would really bring in both the casual and the more hardcore or something like
It
that.
reminds
Because
me a lot. One of my favorite arcade games was Pigskin.
yeah, because
It
you're
reminds me a
right.
little
Because
bit
it
of that.
very Jerry, yeah, pigskin football, and then they randomly slapped the Jerry Glanville license on it for the home release. Like that's weird, but
Well,
pigskin football was fun too.
Pigskin was the one where you're playing like as like Vikings and stuff. Do you
Yeah,
remember that? Okay, okay. So we're talking about the same game, right?
this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't actually played that port. I didn't. I don't think I've ever seen it out in the
Yeah,
wild.
for some reason they put like Jerry Glanville on it, and I'm like, football with an attitude, a bad
Yeah.
attitude. Okay, whatever. But yeah, it does. It's like that game pretty much was the spiritual successor to something like Mutant League Football.
Do you think it's on the
And
same level as like Tecmo Super Bowl?
no,
No.
but I think it's a pretty strong force though.
Is it
Definitely not
easier
on
to
the same
pick up and
level.
play?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely again not as easy as Tecmo Super Bowl because you do have a lot more options in something like Mutant League Football, and then you also have to factor in the fact that you can kill people on the field, you can fall off the field, you can kill the ref.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun. It's like if you can handle the gore, same thing with the new game. It's like if you can handle the gore, it's so much fun. And
Right.
as far as like a tournament level, yeah, I could definitely see people coming out for that.
Right. Man, I wish it wasn't such an expensive
Yeah, I
game.
know it's pricey now. Yeah,
Yeah,
both of
because
them are
I've
pricey. I think it's weird
yeah,
that
they
like
both
Mutant
are.
League
I think hockey's more expensive.
hockey is more
Uh,
now. I think it's weird that Mutant League Hockey, which to me is the inferior game, I think it's actually strange that this one rose up in value more than football did. But
it,
yeah, they're both great.
and maybe more football games were produced than the hockey version.
Could be. When did Mutant League Hockey come out? I think it was a late release too, wasn't it?
Uh, mm,
No,
Probably
no, not too terribly
no.
late. So
92, 93.
it's 93. So
Okay.
that's not a late release. I think yeah, you're right. They probably just didn't make enough of them. I bet.
Well, hockey's more a regional thing, anyways, or at least it was at the time.
Yeah,
So,
true. But yeah, Mutant League football is awesome.
so
So
where would you rank? Where would you rank it?
I'd be shy to put it in the Emerald tier. I'd say the Invincibility tier is a good
You're
solid
right.
fit for it. I think
It's
for
just
Mutant League Hockey, I would put it in the Ring tier
really.
because like for Mutant League Hockey, to me
Now
Mutant League Hockey doesn't
you
play
just said
well.
that you just said that the hockey game is an inferior game,
Yeah,
and yet you would put in. Oh, I'm sorry, ring tier.
no
Never
Ring
mind. No,
tier, no
yeah,
Ring
definitely
tier.
low. Okay, lower. So while we're at it, might as well just put Mutant League Hockey. Unless you want to talk a little bit about it, um,
I mean
it's
Mutant League
definitely not
Hockey,
on the level of NHL '94
no, not even
or even
close.
yeah.
No, and I think that's really where it kind of falters because, like I said about Mutant League football, it still
Now the
kind of
fighting's
feels like
fun.
oh, the fighting is a lot of fun. No, like with Mutant League Football, it still has the elements of a Madden style game, but it
Right,
plays faster and it's a lot more arcade like. It's still a whole lot of fun. Mutant League Hockey, for some reason, just it feels so slow. I don't know what it is. Like the game just feels a lot slower than something like NHL '94 or something
right,
like that. And yeah, it still has the same charisma. It still has the same like the elements about the game I still love, just like Mutant League Football.
right,
But it's just the game itself is just not as fun to play.
right.
So
So yeah, definitely ring tier.
I think Ring tier for hockey, Emerald tier for football, definitely. I mean not Emerald, sorry, Invincibility tier for football.
Well, this tier thing's new, so even I'm like getting a
Right?
little confused. But it'll we'll get it. We'll have to do another tier sometime or something like that
Yeah.
so we can remember it. All right. So since we're talking about hockey, I think this is, at least in my opinion, goes without saying. But I think NHL '94, and I'm not talking about NHL. I know NHL '93 is good. NHL '95 is pretty good, but NHL '94 seems to take the cake because it has the community. It's one of the nicest communities out there. Actually, these guys have been extremely helpful on the online thing because they've been doing it online for so long. And so if you're listening, don't be afraid to play online. It's not as complicated as it may seem. These guys, the NHL '94 community, play every night. I'm on their Discord channel. They're always competing with each other online. So it's
Nice.
definitely doable, especially with a fast-paced game like NHL '94. But to me, this is the pinnacle right here of the hockey games, and this is definitely Chaos Emerald tier. Would you
Yeah, you
agree?
took the words right out of my mouth. That's basically what I was going to say. It's that it's the pinnacle. Now, I'm not super familiar with all the different NHL games throughout the years.
Right.
I know that this is one of the ones that I played growing up, but you pretty much said it perfectly. Because remember how earlier you talked about how sports games, like, you don't really hear people talking about, say, oh, I still play Madden 96 or
Yeah.
something like that. You don't hear people talking about that kind of stuff.
No.
You do hear people talking about how much they play NHL 94.
Right.
It's like that game still has mega importance today in both the retro community and beyond. Because the funny thing is that, and I'm going to challenge anybody who's like a big hockey player, not counting like the arcade style or hockey games or anything like that, but I don't really think that we captured that kind of magic with a hockey game in roughly any generation past this
Now,
one. I mean, even I
um,
think NHL 2K on the Dreamcast came close.
Wayne
Like
Gretzky's
that.
was pretty fun on the 64.
Oh yeah, but that was more arcade like though.
Yeah, it was like the NBA Jam version of hot for hockey. You know, it was like hockey for or
That wasn't
NBA.
NHL Open Ice, which literally
Oh,
was
Alpine
NBA
Ice.
Jam
That's what I'm
hockey.
thinking of. Yeah.
Oh well, Wayne Gretzky kind of played like it too. It basically
Yeah.
was. I see it as like the prototype to NHL hits, which I loved
Yeah.
NHL hits by the way. But it's like
But no
there
one. I
really
don't hear
wasn't.
anybody playing those.
No, they don't.
No.
They play NHL 94.
Yeah.
So no, I agree with you. I think it definitely deserves to be in the Emerald tier.
All right. So we are almost. We've got 4 games left, and the next one is part of a trilogy, but I think it's probably the best of the two. We haven't talked about many racing games, but this one is Road Rash 2. Um, I played a ton of Road Rash on the Game Boy, but I didn't get to play the Genesis version until much later on. Now I know that there is Road Rash 3, but I think Road Rash 2 was probably I think just got it right. I know it's a little bit slow. It's not like the 3DO version. It's
No,
not, and
no.
um, so yeah, I think there's a better ports out there. The place. I think there was a PlayStation port of it, right? Or was that a late? Or was that just
All
Road Rash?
the of the 3DO Road Rash. Yeah, it was a port.
Yes.
There was a port of it
Yeah,
on the
and I think there was
Saturn
one on the
and on
Saturn,
the the Saturn version's not very good though.
but when it comes
Unfortunately,
to accessibility or ease of entry, the Genesis version is the easiest one to get into and start with. And
I agree.
now again, it's a little slower as far as like frame rate is concerned, but it's still a
Mhm.
lot of fun to play. And I think a lot of people did play it. But is it nuanced enough to where it could be a competitive level game?
I think it could be, and because the thing is that you were saying before about how the frame rate and however is a little bit rough. The interesting thing
Right,
is that I feel that Road Rash, because I played it recently on the Genesis Mini, I feel
right,
that Road Rash 2, or actually just Road Rash in general, I feel like those games still hold up well today.
right.
As strange as it sounds, and even in
Well, what I
multiplayer,
meant
it
by
still
frame
runs
rate
really
was
well.
comparing it to the 3DO version.
Oh well, yeah.
Apples
No,
and
there's
oranges
no
almost.
comparison. Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
comparison to that, unless you're talking about the weird Sega CD version, which was like a strange hybrid of both.
Yeah.
But
Now, Road Rash
um,
64 is a lot of fun. I just don't have anybody ask me that for that one.
wait, I'm sorry, Road Rash 64. I actually haven't
Right.
played that one. I was thinking Road Rash
Oh my
3D.
goodness! All right, so we're getting a list of what you and I are going to sit down and play. Greatest heavyweights, Road Rash 64. I
You
already
know
know what we're going to play.
the funny thing is Tyler always told me that how much he loved Road Rash 64, and I was like, I've never played it. I was thinking Road Rash 3D, which I didn't care for, but
Yeah, a
yeah,
buddy of mine rented it from Blockbuster. That was the first time I played it. We got it from Blockbuster. We played it all night on the 64, and
nice.
it was a lot of fun.
For the 16-bit Road Rashes, like I'll be real, I prefer Road Rash 3 personally.
Really?
But I
Okay.
think that Road Rash 2, and I think a lot of it has to deal with just like aesthetics and environments.
Right.
I prefer the cheesiness of all the multicultural stages and whatnot that's in
Right.
Road Rash 3. I preferred the music. I didn't care for how they tried to go for like a digitized look because that's how like everything was at that time. But I think as far as how well the game plays, I think Road Rash 2 is the best. Like out of the trilogy for the Genesis. Importance wise, it's still hugely important. I think there's still people. I mean, again, it's not a hugely vocal crowd, but there's still people out there that want a new Road Rash. I mean,
Right.
that's why we got Road Redemption and Road Rage. That's where we got like those other indie games that came out, and I still
Right.
think that people really yearn for Road Rash. So I think it'd still be great for a tournament, and I still think that people would come out for it. I wouldn't put it in Emerald tier. I would probably put it in Invincibility tier. It's another
Okay.
great game that I think is great fun in multiplayer.
Yeah, and we've had tournaments for it in the past, and it's done okay. It's just I don't know if it just requires a different kind of marketing effort to get people out for it to know what's actually happening, or people are like, oh, Road Rash, I remember that kind of thing, and then
Yeah,
they want to play, but or you know, uh, but it's also not quite as again nuanced where you have to learn all these different techniques and
no, it's super easy to pick up and
stats
play.
and everything. It's yeah, but it is really easy to pick up and play. So, all right, so that puts that on the invincible. So we have three. We have more on the Chaos Emerald tier than well, except for the ring tier. But yeah, I mean this we got some good ones
Yeah,
lined up.
you
The
picked some
next
awesome
one.
ones in this.
Next one, we've tried doing a tournament for this one before. We did it at Retro City Fest, and we didn't have a lot of people turn out. I don't think people quite understood what we were trying to do because I think when people think of this game, they think like a speed run or something like that. But it's on
Mhm.
the same vein as Desperados, but not quite as interactive, I would say. And that's Sonic 3, the two-player version.
Right.
And I think if you've played, a lot of people played the Sonic 3. I mean, this is definitely, as far as a popular game, a lot of people played the Sonic trilogy. I think Sonic 2 is probably the most popular of them, or at least well regarded. But Sonic 3 was a really good game. So this is not a, you know, diamond in the rough kind of thing. This is something that's really well known. I just don't know if people really know about the multiplayer part of it.
They really don't. And even as I was a kid, you know me, giant Sonic fan,
Yeah,
and even as a kid growing up, like I played games a lot with my sister while we were,
right,
and we played Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 in multiplayer, like for the standard modes a lot. She was always Tails.
right,
And but the thing is that we went out of our way to play the actual two-player versus mode on Sonic 2. We didn't really do it so much in Sonic 3. And I kind of feel that like the level design, because I get what Sega did with this one, because with Sonic 2 they basically took a handful of stages from the mainline Sonic 2 game and they made them
right,
multiplayer. That's basically all they did. Sonic 3 they went and actually made original levels and original, well, I mean they had original music in Sonic 2, but
right.
they made original levels for Sonic 3, and to me they're kind of weak. That's really
So do you,
the downside I'd say about
Do
that.
you think Sonic 2's? Well, I mean, we can just tag this as just the Sonic trilogy, or at least the Sonic 2, Sonic 3
Well, if you're putting Sonic
versus
2 in there, that's definitely going to change where it ranks.
right,
I mean, I can tell you that much. If you're putting it in a level of Sonic 3 for multiplayer, it's good, but not great. Sonic 2 multiplayer, in my opinion, is great.
right,
And yeah, so, you know, Sonic's my boy, but I can't really put it in anything higher than ring tier for multiplayer. Not for this
right.
one.
Now
For
you think Sonic 2 though would probably be invincibility tier.
Totally.
What
I think
what
Sonic 2 would at
separates
least
it
be in it.
from what separates it though, and from the versus standpoint?
I think it's just, again, it comes down to the level design. I think that just the level design, there's no, it really is as you said, it's more of a speed run than anything, which
Right,
and that really, I guess, just comes down to personal preference. Like if you prefer it to be in more of a speed run, and maybe if you design it and tell it's like, hey, a Sonic 3, well, I guess if you say Sonic 3 speed run challenge, people are going to think it's like just single player. But if it's
right,
a versus speed run, then you probably might have a different turnout than you would if you just said multiplayer. Whereas
right,
with Sonic 2, most people are familiar with Sonic 2's multiplayer. It's the same as single player, just get to the end before the other player does in a certain amount of time. It's
So you
more
think this is
intriguing.
so Sonic 3 is definitely ring tier, but if we threw in Sonic 2 for with the versus mode, it would do much better.
I think it would bump it up at least
Right,
one tier if you did that. Now, this is
right.
coming from the person who just recently had a revelation on his life and realizing that, yeah, I actually like Sonic 2 now more than I like Sonic 3. But after all these years of saying, "Oh, Sonic 3 is my favorite. It's my favorite game. Sonic 3 Knuckles is my favorite." But just
Yeah.
recently, I found out about the Sonic 2 2013 remake on Apple TV, and I was playing it with a controller and realizing just this captures the feel of Sonic so much more
Right.
than 3 did. I think 3 is awesome, don't get me wrong. Same thing with the multiplayer. I think that they just kind of expanded it a little too much, if that makes sense.
Right.
I think they went a little too hard into that. I could say the same thing about Sonic Mania. Is I think that maybe they went a little too hard to where you don't have
Yeah.
that same sort of fast-paced feel.
One of
Yep.
our watchers said, "Yeah, Sonic Mania for me."
Well, I mean, don't get me
Before
wrong.
you
I
even
mean,
mentioned it, before you even
right?
mentioned Sonic Mania, he was hyping Sonic Mania.
I love. I mean,
So
don't get me wrong. I love Sonic Mania. It's great.
yeah,
But I think that just from somebody who grew up on like the old school Sonic games, there's a lot more exploration, which is great. But to me, I
right.
guess I kind of prefer that more kind of old school kind of Sonic 2 vibe, you
Yeah.
know? So,
All
yeah,
right.
Sonic
So
3, I'd say put in the ring.
all right, and we can make room for others, and there's two more left, so we'll see.
Okay.
Um, the next one, since we haven't covered this sport, and I'll explain the reason why I included it because there's a Neo Geo version of it, but it's just not practical to do a Neo Geo version of it. I think there's an SNES version of it, but it's debatable about which one is better. Um, it's a fun game though, and that's Super Baseball 2020.
Oh. Yeah. So, to me, it's Super Baseball 2020 is a strange game. It's very strange. And it's coming from somebody who played the arcade game back in the day too.
Right.
So I played the Neo Geo game as a kid, but I love the Genesis version. I thought they
Yeah.
did a great job with it. The game
Oh yeah, it
plays
looks fantastic.
excellently. It looks great. It sounds fantastic. They caught pretty much everything that you could possibly do to bring that game home, even with like the
Yeah.
jumping animations and everything. EA did a great job with it. And I've played the Super Nintendo version, and to kind of settle that debate, I think the Genesis version is better. It's mainly because it plays faster.
That's the
I
general
think it's really what it
consensus
comes
I've
down
seen
to.
online. Is it's just slightly better.
Yep,
The
slightly
Genesis
better.
version.
I'd say so. It might not sound as good, but it definitely plays better. Oh, but it's a blast. But I
Yeah.
feel that it's a hard one to, if you've never played it before, it's a hard one to get people that aren't already familiar with it, or at least within like the realm of Neo Geo and Sega Genesis, to get hype about, because it's
Right.
super niche. Like
So
it's
does it not have that popularity to it that would bring out people from out of the woodworks?
I'd say so.
Yeah.
This is
The
another one kind of
playability
again.
though, it's a lot of fun. It's
Oh,
probably
it's
easier to
awesome.
pick up. It's fairly easy to pick up and play,
Hmm.
but not quite popular enough to
No,
to justify it.
I mean, now it's no, and like what in my opinion is the greatest arcade baseball game ever, which is Baseball Stars 2 on the Neo Geo. I friggin' love that game so much. But Super Baseball 2020 comes pretty close, and it's
I
a
mean, I could
wonderful game.
throw in the only reason I threw in this one because it was the most unique baseball game of. I'm not throwing in the RBI baseballs. I haven't, besides the NES version, I haven't had anybody go, "Oh yeah, I need to play the RBI 3 or
That's
whatever,"
that's
or
the
RBI
interesting thing, is because RBI, they
4.
had like what, 5 RBI games on the Genesis, and yet like when most people
There was a lot.
talk nostalgia and whatnot about it,
I
they
mean, you
always go
just look
back to the
behind you.
NES
You can
games.
see you got the answer right behind you.
Oh yeah,
How many
true.
how many RBIs are there?
Four.
4. Yeah.
Four. So there's four, and then there's RBI 95 on 32X. That's where the
And it's
fifth
not
one
a
is.
coincidence that it is 2020 and we're talking about Super Baseball 2020. So
I know, right?
thanks,
Well,
Alex. So
last year we were talking about Outrun 2019.
yeah,
So the Hindsight Club. Hindsight is
so
2020. Ah.
yeah, exactly.
I'll show myself out.
Yeah,
No, yeah, it's a great game, but I think just because of how niche it is, kind of keeps it from being in the top tier for me.
yeah. So ring tier or invincibility tier?
Nah, Invincibility.
Oh
It's too
yeah.
good to go in the ring tier.
All right. Well, that's there it is. Alrighty. So we have our tier. Before we get to the last one, which will be a fun debate too. what are there any games that I've left out that you think, okay, that's a versus game that he should have included. This would bring out a lot of people and be a good tournament to have.
Just purely from Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Because I want to bring the Genesis people out. That's where
Right.
that's where I struggle. I can't get the Genesis people don't are either they're too old, or I guess, or they're just not very competitive.
I don't really know if it's really too old, but it's also something that a lot of the Genesis games I think are more co-op focused than competitive focused. So
Right.
it's a lot. The multiplayer ones are, so it's a lot tougher to kind of bring people out of the woodwork for that. But I'd probably
Right.
say one good one I could recommend. I know you were talking about racing games before, but this one's actually really good in multiplayer, and it's got a fairly strong name to it. Outrunners. It's like I think that actually might be a good solid one because this
The
one's
light
also.
kind of
Oh, sorry.
turn. There you out.
There we
Okay.
go.
I don't know if I don't
Outrunners.
think I've played Outrunners.
A lot of people have not played this one, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's official. It's the fourth, no third. Sorry, Outrun 2019 doesn't count. It's like
Yeah.
the third because they just changed the name. That's not officially an Outrun game. But
Someone's saying Mortal Kombat 2, and I'm like, not for the Genesis though. It's the
mm,
weaker port for Genesis.
yeah. If you're gonna do Mortal Kombat 2, do
Either
Super
do SNES or
or
32X,
arcade or
but
32X. But
well, and that's what I do. We do for tournaments is we've got the arcade collection for the 360, which is our all arcade perfect. So we just do the Mortal Kombats with that. So
right,
that's why
I'm
I
trying to
haven't
think of
included those.
other great competitive games that you could do. Actually, Rock and Roll Racing would be kind of fun. I think that'd also be kind of a fun game to play in a tournament multiplayer style.
What was
Rampart.
Yeah.
Rampart. I think people would come out
Was
for
it
that.
popular enough though?
I mean, it was a pretty strong arcade game, and the Genesis port's really good.
Yeah.
So
I'll have to
I
come
think
play
so.
that with. We'll definitely have to do something, and I'll have to try that out with you because a lot of those
It's
I
fun,
have.
but yeah, you're right. It's just because a lot of as I'm looking at my wall right now, there really aren't a whole lot of combative versus games on the Genesis. A
Well,
lot of it is
there
co-op.
are quite a few, but I think the problem is a lot of those have better options elsewhere, like the Mortal
Elsewhere.
Kombat or Street Fighter or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough on that. Hmm. I'll
Yeah,
have to really give that some good solid thought and get back to you on that. Double dribble.
yeah, because I'm like I chose what I spent a long time researching this, before I started the Retro World Series to figure out which games were the most popular, or at least the best, most playable ones, and it's difficult to judge popularity online unless it's NHL '94. They're the only community out there for the Genesis dedicated,
I'm
so to
sure one of
speak.
our I'm sure one of the viewers or like one of my followers will probably come up with something, but because I feel like I'm missing a big one.
The versus version of Golden Axe, you forgot about that, like,
Yeah, it's not very good. It's like I feel like I'm missing something big. So somebody please tell me like if I'm
was
missing a
there a
big
fighting
multiplayer game on
version
here.
for? I mean, not tournament fighters, because even if you were to do
Ew.
tournament
Yeah, the
fighters, you would do the
Genesis Tournament
SNES version.
Genesis one's
We've
terrible.
talked about one of the guys brought up NBA Jam. The reason why we don't talk about NBA Jam is because there are some bugs I've discovered in it, and there's better options for ports elsewhere.
Mm.
But yeah, I can't. That's where I've struggled on the Genesis version, man.
And even some of the other ones that I'm thinking about too would probably not be strong enough to bring out. Because I can tell you one other puzzle game that I think is really killer in multiplayer is Zoop. That's another one that's
Really.
really really fun in multiplayer, but nobody would probably show up for that. That's yeah, let's be real, it's super super niche. So yeah,
The
I'm
convention
struggling.
owners will be like, "What are you doing with all these weird?" I remember, like, most of these convention
Right?
owners that bring me on are like, "What game is that?" I think Zoop. Like, is anybody going to come play that? So yeah, that's yeah, it's definitely and you say combative. I think there was quite a few. I just think that are unique to the Genesis, that are
That's where
only
that's what I'm
Genesis, or at
trying to
least
focus
best on
on.
the Genesis. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to focus on because even like other fighting games, like well, in my opinion, I think Samurai Showdown is better on the Genesis versus Super NES. So that would also be another one that you could think about.
And I agree on that one. The only thing is that there's the arcade port is available on the 360 as well, so I
Oh well,
can
then yeah. You
Yeah,
got better
yeah. So
options.
again, there's some
Or
decent ports. It's just they're not good enough.
or even Saturday Night Slam
So,
Masters
no,
too.
SNES is better.
I think yeah, the Super NES
Yeah,
version is better. True that. The
and
Genesis
some
version's
people
still
play
good
that, but
though.
yeah,
It's still good though. But yeah, I mean, like anybody, please like let me know because I feel like I'm missing a big one. That's like Genesis Focus. That's a good versus one that we haven't talked about already.
yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, like I said,
um,
we could talk about NBA Live or FIFA or something, but or maybe what Sensible was it Internet Sensible Soccer or something like that. I don't know if there's a Genesis
World
version of
Championship
that.
Soccer
Maybe,
or World Cup Italia '90 for those across the pond.
yeah,
Uh,
but those just aren't going to bring out a lot of people, and
nah.
I shy away from the simulation based sports games because those would make the tournaments last forever.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like 30-minute halves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You get your money's worth for that kind of time, but we'd be there all night. So,
True.
well,
It's
let's
not
go
like
on
you're
to the
playing Sega
last.
Soccer Slam, you know?
Right, right. Well, let's go on to the very last one, the coup de grace, and is WWF Royal Rumble. So since we haven't had any wrestling games, so now we have a wrestling game. What do you think of this one? There is an SNES version of this one. Um, I personally prefer this version because it has Hulk Hogan in it, and you can't have you can't have WWF without Hulk Hogan in it, and the SNES version doesn't have it. So I
Right.
think it wins just on that fact alone.
Which is strange. Who was the exclusive wrestler that was on the Super NES version? That it's like I'm trying to remember who
It
that.
wasn't Macho Man, was it?
No, because Macho Man was Macho Man in the Genesis. I have to think about it for a second.
I'm
Yeah,
having
Macho
look
Man's in the
now.
Genesis version. So
Maybe it was
I'm trying to think of who it was, but yeah, Undertaker,
was it
Hulk
wasn't
Hogan,
Ric
Crush,
Flair,
Lex
was it?
Luger. No, Ric Flair is on the Ric Flair's not on this game at all.
Okay,
He's only
this
in
is
the
yeah,
only WWF game from that
yeah.
era was Steel Cage.
The SNES version had exclusive to the SNES version was Ric Flair, Mr.
Oh, was
Perfect,
he? Oh.
yeah, Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna, and Tatanka. The Genesis
Oh.
version has exclusively Hulk Hogan, IRS, Jim Duggan, the model, and Papa Shango.
See, for me and which wrestlers I prefer, honestly, now knowing that, because I didn't know that, to be completely honest. Now knowing that, I would take the Super NES version.
Yeah,
I would. It's got the $1 Million Man. Come on. But we're talking about the Genesis version today.
you're right.
So, it's one of those games that like the old school WWF games are really a love it or hate it. Like people either love them and they can still go back to them and they think that they're great, or they hate
Right.
their guts because their thumbs are pretty much raw by the no pun intended.
Well, and the
They're
thing
pretty
is,
much
is
raw by
WWF
the
Royal
end.
Rumble was one of the few IJN games that's actually okay.
Oh yeah. LJN, yeah, it is one of the.
LJN, not IJN.
I mean,
LJN,
LJN.
yeah.
The funny thing is that a lot of they had a couple of others that really aren't so bad, like Maximum Carnage. But
Yeah,
yeah,
Maximum Carnage is
Royal
really
Rumble,
good.
like pretty much, because to me, I kind of couple all three of those WWF games that came out: Super WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, Raw. They all kind of
Right.
like slight upgrades. I mean, the Royal Rumble had the Royal Rumble mode, so which I love a Royal Rumble. So it's like just that by default pretty much puts it in the top of those three. Now, of course, there's the WrestleMania the arcade game, which in
Yeah,
my
someone
opinion
just brought that
is
up about the
it's a tier
PS1 or
on its
SNES.
own.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a tier on its own. The Super NES version is terrible, but the Genesis and the 32X versions are fantastic. And to
Yeah.
me, it's like that. If I had to pick any of the WWF games, that would be the one I would pick for the
So
tournament.
you think
Just because that,
WWF Royal Rumble should be replaced with Super WrestleMania?
no,
For
not Super WrestleMania. This one, WrestleMania the arcade game. This
okay, all right.
this is the one that I think would
For
take its place.
32X or Genesis?
Personally, Genesis because of frame rate. That's
Right.
an interesting thing. The 32X version has better colors, but the Genesis version has a cleaner frame rate. That makes no sense to me.
It's kind of like
bad port. That's all.
Pitfall. Pitfall. Genesis had a better. Yes.
Another
Yeah.
another problematic. So
If,
that's
I-
also
I don't mind the 30 frames per second that the 32X version had. I think it's a pretty good port, but yeah,
it's still a great
definitely-
port, but I mean, to me, I think that the Genesis version just plays a bit smoother. So I have to
Right.
pick it on that. Also,
So
you know, I was talking-
throw out WWF Royal Rumble and replace it with WWF WrestleMania for.
right. That's what I would do. But
or
I mean, if
or the arcade game, WrestleMania the arcade
the
game.
arcade game. But if you're not going to use the arcade game and you have to choose between one of the other three, this is the one to go with. In my opinion, I
Now,
think Royal Rumble is the one to go with.
you don't like the SNES port of, or the Saturn port of the PlayStation port of the arcade game,
No, the Saturn and PlayStation ones are fine.
right?
They're fine. It's just the Super NES version because it plays slower and it's missing two people. It doesn't have Bam Bam Bigelow and it doesn't have Yokozuna. So I'm like, that's lame.
Right.
Don't know
Now,
why.
so if we're sticking to Genesis, though, the arcade game, the WrestleMania the arcade game is still what it should be.
I think so because I think that one, for the most part, the matches don't last nearly as long. That's for one
Right.
thing.
Yeah, the matches
It's a
can
lot more
last so long
arcadey
for Royal
feel.
Rumble.
They can.
Yeah.
Oh, they totally can. Meanwhile, matches in WrestleMania it's like maybe 2-3 minutes at max.
Yeah.
Because it's basically NBA Jam meets Mortal Kombat meets WWF. That's what it was.
Right.
And to me, it's one of those games that if I could have like in my dream arcade, I would totally have a WrestleMania arcade game in my dream arcade. I would.
Now, if we throw out the Genesis version and say we're going to do a WrestleMania the arcade game tournament, which version should we do?
Genesis.
Not Saturn, not PlayStation, not 32X.
Well,
if we throw out the Genesis version.
If you throw out the Genesis version, then I would probably say go with PlayStation, if anything.
Okay.
So I think if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, but I think the Saturn version's load times are kind of bad. But other than that, the PlayStation version to me is perfectly fine. It's pretty much a perfect port, just with load times.
Yeah, I've had requests to do a No Mercy tournament, but I've never had a WrestleMania the arcade game.
Well, I mean, if you put in No Mercy, people are going to show up.
Right.
I can guarantee you that. If you pick No Mercy or if you pick WCW NWO Revenge on N64,
maybe I should do No Mercy in Vegas because the Level Up Expo does wrestling there.
Do No Mercy.
Maybe I should do a No Mercy tournament.
If you have to pick any retro wrestling game, No Mercy is the one. I mean,
pro wrestling's a lot of fun for the NES.
That's true. That is true. That and
it's like the only good
Tecmo
wrestling
World
game on the NES.
No. Tecmo World Wrestling is good too.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I just have a certain, I don't know. There's something about pro wrestling that I like a little bit better.
Yeah, but if you're gonna do one, No Mercy should be your go-to. People will show up for that, and it's one of the best wrestling games ever.
Right.
I personally prefer NWO Revenge or WCW NWO Revenge, but that's just because personal opinions. They're almost the same game. No Mercy does play a little bit better. But going back to this though, so I mean for Royal Rumble,
if we had to rank WWF Royal Rumble,
I would probably put it in the ring tier.
Right.
Like, if anything, just because it's one that's really hard. It's hard to go back to any of those three WWF games now, just because they're such a slog to play. They really are.
They didn't age well, I don't think.
They did not. No, they did not age well. But I bet you that if you had the people that grew up with those and they have the nostalgia for it, they probably would come out for a tournament for it. So, because there's still good multiplayer to it, just expect to be there for a while.
Yeah.
So I'd say ring tier.
Okay. So that finalizes our list. You say that's a pretty good list right there?
I think so.
So do we need to have an all Sega event and see?
Dude, I would love an all Sega event.
I've got about 45 Segas, and a bunch of Saturns and Dreamcast and all that.
I'm just concerned for the general public. I don't know if you would have as good of a turnout if it's all Sega. Just, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I'd love it. But if you're looking at like the general population, it's funny. Like somebody did a poll on Twitter. Like one of my people that I follow on Twitter did a poll like between Genesis and Super NES. It's just like really which one do you prefer? And literally it was a 3/4 1/4 spread. 75% Super NES, 25% Genesis. It makes me sad, but it's just the truth. The Super Nintendo was just more popular.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was it a 3-to-1 ratio on sales or 2-to-1?
No, that was just. What was it? I don't know about the sales numbers.
I was wondering if that poll reflected kind of what actual sales were. No, it was just
personal. It was just personal preference. That's all it was.
Right.
But as far as sales wise goes, I don't know like really what the sales were between Super NES and Genesis. But just from a popularity standpoint, I mean, like as much as I love Sega, it's hard to beat the Big N. It's hard to beat the Nintendo. but we dang sure tried.
Yeah. So I think that wraps it up, man. I really appreciate you doing this. I know I threw you something out of left field on doing this tier.
Dude, this
Um,
this was a blast. I would love to do
yeah.
this again sometime.
Yeah. I don't know what I don't know what kind of tiers we could do because we're more on the competitive side. We can definitely talk games all day. That's for sure. Maybe we can talk about tiers for puzzle games since you and your wife love those games.
Oh, I'm down.
That would be a fun one because especially when you start adding all the different consoles, for games like that. I'll throw Atari in, see what
Yeah.
happens. Yeah, we're gonna have a 2-player breakout tournament. Yeah, that'd be kind of
Oh,
fun
I'd be down for that too.
if I can get the
Super
paddles all to
breakout?
work consistently. Yeah, Super Breakout.
Super
Yeah,
breakout?
not
Yeah.
Breakout, not the original Breakout. Yeah, Super Breakout's really good, but
Yep.
the problem is trying to get paddles all to work.
Yeah.
So
True that.
because I've tried to do a Warlords tournament a few times, and the paddles are so inconsistent. I got to figure that one out first. But yeah, we definitely need to do this again. For people that want to get to know you better and watch your stuff and learn more about what you've got to say, where do they go again before we wrap
All right.
things up?
Well, you can find me pretty much anywhere on the internet at G to the next level. YouTube.com/G to the next level. It's like welcome to the next level, but with a G, of course, like what you see here. It's pretty much retro gaming in the modern age, but with a little bit of Sega and Sonic the Hedgehog flair. And like I mentioned before, it's a variety channel. I welcome pretty much any gamers of any age in any variety to come join me on my journey as we take a look at the past, the present, and the future level by level. It's basically how it is. I'm pretty active on Twitter at G to the next level, Instagram at G to the next level. I have a Facebook page too. I'm going to be starting up a Discord pretty soon at some point. But yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me.
All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and this has been great. So
Yeah, it was a
and I
blast.
wish
Yeah, I
I wish the
appreciate
best
it.
of
Thank
luck
you.
to you. Hopefully, we'll see you at another convention, or let's figure out a time I can come over and we can play. I can bring Road Rash 64 over to play.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish the best of luck to you with your YouTube channel, and I look forward to seeing you and your wife again at our tournaments.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Al.
Hey, no problem. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
All right, everyone. That was George Gracin with G to the next level. That wraps things up for tonight. Don't forget, next weekend, July 11th, we're having our Dr. Mario and Tetris tournaments online. If you need help with that, please don't hesitate to contact me. I can help you set it up really easily with a screen share on our Discord channel. So don't hesitate to message me. Other than that, that wraps it up for tonight. I really appreciate everybody coming in and listening and taking part of our episode 7. Look forward to seeing you next Thursday and same time. And yeah, have a great night. Have a great 4th of July. Be safe. Have fun.